This podcast provides a platform for our guests to express their own personal views and opinions. Some or all of these views and opinions may not be shared by Ben and/or Yoel.
Welcome to the Too Dad to Quit podcast,
the podcast where we highlight stories of dads on the other side of divorce
to inspire and give strength to dads going through it.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Yoel.
Welcome back to the Too Dad to Quit podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, and rate us on Spotify and iTunes and wherever else you are getting the podcast. It's really important to help get our message out and make sure that as many people are able to listen to this podcast as possible. You can find us on toodadtoquit.com, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Too Dad to Quit. We want to hear from you. Share your story, want your comments. Tell us what else you would like to hear. Send us your questions. We are here to help you. We have big plans, and thank you for listening. On our podcast, we have our Too Dad to Quit moments, and this week I thought I'd share one of mine. So I was with my daughter, and her zipper got stuck, and she wanted to take off her jacket so badly, and she couldn't do it. And she came over to me, and she's like, "I can't get this off." And she just was about to cry. And it took me like a minute and a half, and I was able to wiggle the zipper open, and I opened it up, and I was not expecting it. She gave me the biggest hug she's given me in a very long time. And so I just wanted to say, those Too Dad to Quit moments, they don't have to be the biggest things. They don't have to be, taking them on a trip to a roller coaster. It could just be a little thing of fixing their zipper, and you will be their hero. So don't take all those little moments for granted. They come out of nowhere. So I just wanted to share that very nice story. This week we have Arnie Goldfein. He is someone I've known for a long time. He's I would say one of my fake uncles, as my life traveled many places and I've adopted many families. So his sister, basically, I call her mommy, and is very dear to me. And he has a very interesting story of addiction, which alcohol, which apparently started very, very young. And he had 6 kids, and that was the time when he, decided to go and figure this out and go into recovery. And he's been sober for 37 years. And this is his story, and I'm glad to have him on here because I know his story is not unique, and it's just incredible to see the relationship he has with his kids and continues to have, and he's got 25 grandchildren, and I just want to give hope to people out there that are suffering through kind of the same experience as him.
Yeah, by the way, I didn't mention this to Arnie. I should have. He looks great. I mean, I couldn't believe how many grandkids he has. He really looks amazing. And more importantly than looks is his self-awareness and intelligence and his vulnerability and his willingness to be open and honest. It was extremely refreshing. I related to a lot of the things that he talked about, ideas of ego and humility and caring for oneself and self-esteem. Our audience will have a lot of takeaways from this, and I am very, very excited for them to listen.
Yeah, and let's get into it. Today we are sitting with Arnie Goldfein. Arnie grew up in Baltimore and moved to New York for most of his adult life, and recently returned to Baltimore to be closer to his children and grandchildren. Arnie has been married twice. It has been 12 years since his last divorce. Arnie has been blessed with 6 children and 25 grandchildren. He is also an avid biking enthusiast and recently had to take a break due to an injury, but his life work as helping as many people as possible to grow their spiritual lives. So Arnie, or Uncle Arnie, as I like to call you, it's an honor to have you on here.
Thank you.
I've only heard, an overview, helicopter view of, I guess, your history, and when I got involved with your wonderful family from many, many different sides. And it's been wonderful to see and hear, before I got there, what was going on and how you've made those changes in your life to see where you're at. And also, you being so involved in the computer guy, my father was also the computer guy. And so I had a natural connection to you in that respect, that there was a religious guy that kind of did the same thing as my father. So I was naturally drawn to you. And as a person, you've always been good and supportive for me. And I was pretty much on my own, traveling between both sides of your family. And so I thank you for that. So where I'd like to start here is kind of, growing up in Baltimore, what that was like. I was very close to your mother. She was a very special lady. And she had a big impact on my life, actually. And just what it was like growing up in Baltimore. I know that you've got a very interesting family and situation there as well.
So, wow, I'm going to learn stuff about other people, and what other people see of me and what I see of me don't necessarily coincide. Baltimore was very interesting. I'm a kid. I was a kid that probably was broken, from day one, and I say that because I get to look back at my life and see, how do I even express it? And see what was wrong then, but that didn't know that something was wrong then. I thought my life was fine. I thought it was, all great and, peaches and cream, as they used to say. And I grew up, I grew up here. I went to school here. I always felt different than everybody. I always had this level of anxiety and fear and differenceness that just embraced me. But I didn't think that there was anything wrong, even though I felt like something was wrong, but I didn't have the labels for what was wrong. And for years, my sister and I, in my adult life, my sister and I would sit and compare notes about our families, and she would say to me, "Arnie, we grew up in the same house, but we didn't see the same thing that each other saw." The fact that my mother was such an impact on you. You're going to bring me to tears when it comes to that, because every time my mom comes up in a conversation and my sister comes up in a conversation, the tears just flow, because there were two individuals in my life that had a huge impact. And I'm not just talking about, well, that's mom or that's my sister. My sister was my peer until she passed away, which was about 12 years ago. And my mom's been gone already for 23, 24 years, 1999. We grew up in a crazy house. And again, it's something that I could look back and see, but I couldn't tell you at the time. I thought it was normal. I lived in a neighborhood where people used to throw. I saw pots flying out of people's windows, and when I saw pots flying out of people's windows and parents screaming at kids, I figured that was normal, and that's what the norm was in our house. And that's really what it was. I always felt, like I said, I felt like the square peg in a round hole. Maybe the round peg in a square hole, whatever didn't fit the way it should have, that was me. And I guess the easiest way to express it for me in my world is I was thirsty way before I picked up my first drink. Something was going on inside of me. There was a void in my soul that I couldn't explain. There's a great movie out there, or there was. I don't know if it's, I don't even know if you can find it. When I was growing up, there was a movie that said something about the fact that everything you wanted to know about sex, but we're afraid to ask.
Woody Allen.
You didn't know that?
I'm saying that's Woody Allen's movie.
That's a Woody Allen. I think it was a Woody Allen movie.
Yeah.
In my recovery as an alcoholic and a drug addict, I learned that everything I always wanted to know about life was really in the 12-step rooms, because I had no clue how to live. My perception of life was different than others. Now, I don't know if that's because my mother looked at me funny or my grandmother looked at me funny when I was a year and a half old. I have no idea what it is. I don't think it really makes a difference anymore. All I know is that at some point, I just felt different. And I went to school here. I was friendly with everybody. So everybody says, you were a great guy. I didn't feel like I was a great guy. I just felt that aloof, separate, apart from kind of person that just went along with what everybody, because I didn't understand my feelings. I wasn't allowed to have my feelings. I grew up in a house where there was a lot of rage. And I was the recipient of that rage, my brother and I both. And my sister was the princess. So she was the one, Arnie, I'm the princess. Yeah, I know. We know we're ready. Everybody knows. And my mom was a very staunch supporter. She was, it was a different generation where people stayed together because they stayed together. And if I would ever look back and if I could ever figure it out, the only complaint that I really have, as far as my childhood goes, is that my father was incapable, and I say this lovingly, I have no anger, residual anger or resentment. He was incapable of knowing that he could do something about his life. Probably, I mean, there's a great book out there. It's a novel, and it was a story, I think it's The Lost Patient. And it's a story of this woman who was found standing over her husband with a knife in her hand, and they're very well-to-do people, and they take her and they put her in a psych ward. And the story is related from her side and from the therapist's side, who takes care of us. Two different directions. And the therapist goes on to tell my story of how he grew up, and that was my story, with a rageful father, with a this and that, and he goes into really crazy detail, about the whole thing. And at the end, he described something that was so profound to me, where he said, if my father were alive today, he probably would have been diagnosed with a mental illness.
Wow.
So you got me, guys, because you got me. In those days, I was born in 1951. In those days, going to therapy, being Jewish and going to therapy was either number one, they couldn't afford it because they couldn't afford anything anyway, right? Or the stigma, add more stigma on top of oh my God, they're in therapy. So that was my childhood. Yeah, I grew up and I played baseball and I was in the Little League and it was also, we were a Jewish family in a non-Jewish neighborhood, and yeah, there was anti-Semitism, and then there was all this stuff that goes with it. And I think they tried to protect me to the best that they could, but unfortunately it was not enough. Because like I said, I was the guy that was thirsty way before I picked up my first drink.
Wow. And when did you pick up your first drink?
So my first real drink, when I can look back and I see what's going on, actually happened when I was 3-4 years old. I was diagnosed with a stomach ailment, and they gave me a prescription of medication called Paragoric. And if you look up Paragoric, it is 40% alcohol and 5% morphine. Wow. And something happened that day, and I remember it, guys. I tell this story all the time, where I hated the way it smelled, I hated the way it tasted. In a millionth of a second, I loved the way it made me feel, and I wanted more. And we can get into detail later because I'll talk about some addiction a little bit. And that's really the underlying basis of what addiction's all about. Like what's going on here? Why even at that early age, I wanted more of something. It made me feel better. Well, medication, aspirin made me feel better too, but I wasn't running after aspirin. And the interesting thing is that 6 months later, when I had the same stomach ailment, I remember saying I wanted this Paragoric, and the doctor said, well, we don't prescribe that anymore, which I found out a couple of years ago is not true. It's still out there on the market. And I was angry about it. I was upset about it at the age of 4. My real first drink came at services on a Saturday morning, and one of the old men called me over, and he said, come over here, take a glass of schnapps, because that's all that there was in those days. There wasn't any of the fancy stuff like there is today. Like I missed out on the Johnny Blue and the Maker's Mark and all that stuff I missed out on. Actually, it's funny because for years, my clients used to give me cases of Johnny Walker Blue. And, wow. and I'm like, and McAllen, 18 years old, and I'm handing them out like it's, people, oh, Arnie, thank you. And I'm like, and they're sipping it so nicely. And oh, this is delicious. And I'm like, what's wrong with you people? So I was 11 years old, and the same kind of thing happened, but an additional thing happened that day where I picked up my first drink. I picked up that drink. Now you have to understand that there's now 7 years additional into my life, and and some of the dysfunction that went on. I picked up the drink. I hated the way it smelled. I hated the way it tasted. In a millionth of a second, I loved the way it made me feel. And then some other magic happened that day, where I all of a sudden got bolder, and I got taller, and I got better looking. I don't know how that's possible, guys, but I was better. And I realized that day that the old men became nice. My father became a nice guy that day. And I made a determination that this is how people get through life. My magic happened through a substance that day. Now, I didn't go out at 11 years old and drink, whatever. And on the way home from school that day, I said to my father, I want more. And he, of course, laughed and said no. But some seed was planted in my brain. And to understand that, again, I had to go into recovery to understand what that planting was. That I understood what alcoholism is all about and where that took me to.
Was there any of this in your family?
Not that I'm aware of. It seems that I have one of my mother's sisters, my aunt. There was quiet under the table. Aunt Naomi is an alcoholic, kind of thing. And she actually said to me at one point in my life that she was very proud of me that I got into recovery, but we never had discussions. There's a whole litany of paperwork and writings and scientific. Let me just move my camera a little bit. I don't know if that's any better. Discussions and research on where does alcoholism start? Is it in the genes? Can you drink yourself into alcoholism, and so on and so forth? They say that it skips a generation, which I'm looking at my grandchildren and saying, yeah, it skips a generation. Of grandkids that I'm saving seats for in AA meetings. So I don't know how to answer that. I really don't know how to answer it. I could tell you some of the attitudes that are characteristic of active alcoholics was very much alive in my family, on both sides of my family. So you got me, guys, on that one.
What are those attitudes?
Well, there's a survival mentality. We got to do whatever it takes to make us work, and that will include being dishonest and being negative and being selfish and self-centered and fearful and I think some of it is healthy, but when it comes to a substance and fears being the propulsion system that we have, that kind of manifests differently in someone who has a substance use disorder than somebody who doesn't. It's just the way that it is. I mean, we can go through that. That'll take us weeks to go through to understand and to deal with that one.
By the way, you mentioned your clients. What do you, just for context for our audience, what is it you do professionally?
Okay, so I do a bunch of things. Obviously, the bottom line is whatever makes money. Unfortunately, I still got to make a living. I don't understand. The landlord, he still wants his rent every month. I don't get that. But I've had a computer hardware business for probably about 40 years now. And thank God, it's paid the bills. But a bunch of years ago, when I first got into recovery, I started being of service and being helpful and mentoring people. And now professionally, I am a certified peer advocate, and I help people plan their recovery lives. And that's across the board with whatever the addictions are, because I pretty much, you have one. I'm not saying if you have one, you have them all, but it's like whack-a-mole. I put it down over here, and then I got to take care of it over here, and then I got to deal with it over here until it all comes together, and I realize that what I'm really dealing with is me. I'm me.
Yeah, no, I've heard that. Some of the other podcasts I listen to, there's a lot of like actors and a lot of these people that are now coming and becoming dry, and they explain, like, first it was alcohol, then it was sex, then it was drugs, then it was, and so you get one under, and then another one pops up, and it keeps going.
Right, and then and the crazy part about it is we put down the alcohol or the substances, and what happens is the bad news is, the good news is we get our feelings back, and the bad news is we get our feelings back. And all the neurotransmitters are gone, and the body, if it's healthy, it'll start reacting again, and I react. I mean, the first thing that woke up was below my waist, and I'm like, now what am I going to do with this, here? And because I was never taught how to deal with it on a healthy level to begin with. All my teachings came either from the street, or it came from television, or it came from based in fear from yeshivas. I'm going to burn in hell forever, and I'm going to go blind, for those who understand what that is all about. And now I'm clean and sober, and wow, now what do I do? And I'm healthy, and so there was a lot of stuff that had to be learned how to deal with or dealt with, and then learning how to deal with the rest of my life, because there's other areas of my life. There is my physical being and being able to take care of that, which is connected to my emotional being, which needs to be taken care of, and my mental being, and my spiritual being, and my financial being, and my social being, and my sexual being. And none of those are separate. And I cannot separate any of those together. So if I'm not feeling well physically, well, on a simple level, I don't want to go to work. Right? Or if I'm not feeling good physically, I don't want to have sex, or any of the things. And if my thinking is off because I'm overwhelmed with something, all those other areas are going to be affected also. So learning how to deal with the unmanageability of the life in sobriety has always been and continues to be, not because it's the same way as it was when I first got clean and sober, but life changes on a day-to-day basis, and my fears change on a day-to-day basis, and I have to deal with that literally on a day-to-day basis, and not in a negative sense. It's not like, oh my God. It's like, oh, great. It's, what's new today that we're going to deal with, and being able to deal with it on a very healthy, and I'm going to say joyful level. Like, okay, God, let's go have a good, what's on the tap for today that we're going to have a good time with. So.
When did you get clean and sober, by the way?
January 4th, 1986. I just celebrated 37 years in recovery.
Wow. That's a lot of chips.
Yes, it is. Here, 1 second. Here. I got one sitting right here.
Wow.
Nice. So I want to jump back a little bit. So you're 11 years old in Baltimore, and then at some point you left Baltimore and ended up.
Yes, when I was 14, because I didn't know how to deal with Arnie, and was having trouble in school, and you know how that goes. So they sent me, I still say to this day, they sent me away to yeshiva. Get rid of them. I wish I could look at it in a different way. I haven't been able to do that quite yet, but I went away to yeshiva that understands people like me. We've heard that many times over. And when I hear that somebody say that, oh, they deal with special kids, or okay, here we go. And so I went to Boston, to a yeshiva in Boston. It was a branch of Lakewood. Was a base medrash Gavoa. And I was there for 2 years, and that's where life kind of really kicked in, because it was a culture shock. I did not grow up I grew up Orthodox, but I did not grow up in a black hat yeshiva world. That came involved, and then I discovered porn magazines, so more education off the street, and I discovered halacha, which doesn't work well with being human, in a sense, when you're 14 and there's nobody to talk to about this stuff. And
The Jewish law.
Right. Oh, right, correct. Sorry about that. Yeah, Jewish law. And the hormones are raging, and I had no place to go with it. And if I did go to somebody in yeshiva about it, either I was ridiculed or I was slapped. I mean, by the rabbis. I mean, I'm not saying beaten, but like whack, across the face. So you put that combination together, that when my first Purim came, which is a Jewish holiday where drinking is encouraged, my rabbi, my teacher, we had a party in his house, and he said, here, have a glass of wine, here, have a glass of wine, here, have a glass of wine. And Arnie was the guy that was under the table, and Arnie was the guy that was dragged back to his room, and Arnie was the guy that vomited and was sick, and Arnie was the guy that just felt like like crap. And when I passed out and I came to, what I remembered was feeling good. I didn't remember any of the other stuff. So I ran back to his apartment, and I banged on the door, and I said, I want more, and I want more. And he says, I'm not giving you any more. And I said, well, if you don't give me more, I'm going to jump out the window. And he said, go ahead, you live on the first floor. So
Nice. Okay. And so you were there for 2 years and
I was there for 2 years. There was a lot of insanity that was there again because there was no support like we know today on those 14-year-old hormones. And it wasn't just hormones. I was away from home for the first time. My parents very rarely sent me any money, so any money that I made, I had to hustle for. I really had to hustle for. I think one time it could be more, but I remember one time I got $5 and my parents gave me, and I was thrilled. But I ran the canteen and I stole from the canteen, and I did what people do when they're in survival mode. And that lasted for, like I said, for a couple of years, and I came back and I went to school back in Baltimore, to the same school that I had grown up in. So the only thing that was missing in the 12 years of school, 13 years of school, was those 2 years, my 9th and 10th grades, which are, very impressionable years. But now I'm back, and people welcomed me back. And of course, I still, when I went through my history, I was resentful because I left in the 8th grade and I didn't graduate with all these guys. And all this stuff that we try to watch out not to happen happened. That I was left out of the yearbook in that year, like all that crazy stuff. And but I came back when I was, I think, 15, 16, whatever ages, whatever grades that interprets into. And I spent 11th and 12th grade and very vibrant, very alive, and very active, and very much more aware of my crazinesses without me realizing that I was crazy. And always ran away from people and from situations. I didn't like the yeshiva world because I didn't like it. I didn't like people I was, went to school with. I always felt different. Again, back to that different stuff. And I did, after I graduated high school, I went to college. But what do I need college for? Because I'm a survivor. I'm going to find a way to make life work. And I actually stayed in college. I was in college for about 8 months. And computers, by the way, computer science, because it fascinated me, always fascinated me. Still to this day, it does. That I can sit in front of my computer, how far away am I? Well, you're in Israel, so I'm 6,000 miles away, and it's as if we're sitting next to each other.
Yep.
To me, it's remarkable. It's just absolutely remarkable. And then I moved to New York. I got a job. First, I got a job in Maryland. I worked for about a year. And then I one day, out of nowhere, my sister invited me to New York. Why don't you come to New York for Shabbos? And I went to Far Rockaway, and Rabbi Shlomo Feifeld was there, and he said, "So you'll come. All right, Rabbi tells me to come, so I come." And so it was a slight detour I made to New York for like 50 years, just a slight detour. And I just came back here a year ago in June. So that's where, I was really left to be free when I moved to New York at the time. I was on my own. I moved in with my sister, and she didn't, after 6 weeks, she said to me, says, "You don't belong here. I have a marriage. I'm, newly married. I need to, thrive my marriage. You need to find a place." And of course I was, disappointed and devastated. But she never let me out of her, under her wings, so to speak. And we always stayed close. We stayed close until she died. But that's where I was left. I was left a free reign, and Arnie being in free reign in a community where drinking was I don't know, it was like, I don't know, like a reward almost for the week's accomplishments. It didn't bode well for a guy like me. Let me just put it that way. I never, again, those same feelings of not being a part of, always feeling different, always feeling separate, just manifested itself. I drank more simply because I had the ability to drink more. I was working full time, had to raise a family. I got married very young, and I immediately had kids. By the time I was 22, 23 years old, I already had a kid. And I just thought life was a breeze until I saw people younger than me moving forward with their lives in much more secure ways, in solid ways. And jealousy kicked in and resentment kicked in, and it just was an excuse in many ways to drink more, not because I purposely wanted to or understood why, but again, alcohol allowed me to do what I couldn't do for myself in many ways. It didn't. I like. It's a saying that I hear people say. It didn't make me to what I was. It revealed what I was. That I was very selfish, very self-centered, very jealous, very envious, and at the same time very lazy. Like why should I do anything? Somebody else should take care of me. And that went on. That went on until my life really got unmanageable. I mean, further, where I was having trouble with my wife, and watching people move on. I was actually hired by a famous frozen food company at the time when early marriage, where I was number 4 in a 4-man company. And 5 years later, because of my addiction, I was asked to leave. And I was number 11 in that company, and I was sweeping the floors and driving a truck, and I couldn't understand why. I just didn't understand it. At some point, somebody suggested I might have a problem, and they suggested I go to a therapist. So I went to an orthodox therapist up in Muncie, New York, who sat in his big leather chair with the beard to the middle of his chest. And I told him my story, and he said to me very simply, he said, "I don't think you have a drinking problem because there's no such thing as a Jewish alcoholic."
Wow.
He's laughing. He's laughing. But he then went on to tell me I should go to my doctor and get a prescription for pills. And so I went to my doctor, and my doctor said, "No, I'm not doing that." And so I found a doctor who would. That's like any good alcoholic, drug addict. And it allowed me to drink better. And that was really, it was a progressive, they call it a progressive illness. It just got worse. It just got worse. I actually went to AA at one point, and I was there for about 6 or 8 weeks. And again, my hearing, I don't hear what other people hear. One of the statements in AA when they open a meeting is that we are not, there are no dues or fees for AA membership. And what I heard was, there are no Jews or thieves. And I said, okay, I'm done, because I'm Jewish and I'm a thief. So, I mean, I would steal from you. I didn't rob you directly, but I was in survival mode. I had a business. So there's plenty of ways, and you guys, everybody knows this. There's plenty of ways that in business people make mistakes in their own favor and they don't say anything. And I found a way to do that. And I mean, ultimately I made amends to them all, but at the time, I did whatever it took, to survive. And the best that alcohol ever got me without treatment was to get me drunk again. Or I should change that. The best that sobriety ever got me was to get me drunk again, because I didn't know how to live. I just didn't know how to live. And at a certain point in my drinking career, I looked in the mirror one day and said, I want to die. That's what addiction took me to. It just took me to a point that I wanted to die. And through a series of events that I had very, very, very little to do with, it was being graced by God. Don't ask me what, all of a sudden he came out with his scepter, and he said, okay, we're gracing him right now. I got clean and sober, and I don't know how else to tell you this, but I definitely would not be alive today, because along with the alcohol and the drugs that I used, there was cigarettes and there was food, and there was sex and all the stuff that went with it that I had no values for. And if there was food that was involved and it made me feel good, back to the whack-a-mole story, So I did all kind of strange stuff for a bunch of strange reasons that I didn't understand at the time. And again, it was only once I got into recovery that I began to learn what alcoholism was all about. Was I able to begin to make some of those changes and to understand what was really going on.
And
Wow.
and in terms of your first marriage, so you're saying that you were not aware at the time that you had a problem, or you knew that there was something? Like, did you have any sort of idea that something's off
Well,
here?
there's always an inclination, guys. Let me just turn the light on. Hold on, because it's getting dark over here. Hope that's a little better. There's always this subtle, soul inclination that something's not right. Something's just not right. I couldn't put my finger on it. And I didn't know, because nobody else had an answer either. I mean, my rabbi told me, he says to me at one point, he said, I don't know what to do for you anymore. Nobody knew that, nobody understood alcoholism at the time. If you look at the social work white papers from the late 70s to early 80s, they're pretty specific in that the Jewish alcoholism is virtually non-existent. So whatever the problem was, everybody figured it was something else until somebody actually through somebody, a friend of mine whose wife was in OA, which is Overeaters Anonymous. They came to this realization that maybe Arnie's got an alcohol problem, and
Wow.
and there was no place else for me to go. There was no place else to go. Therapy didn't work. Clergy didn't work. Not drinking and not drugging for sure didn't work. Right. Did my wife have a clue? And so she thought my behavior was normal. So in many ways, my first wife was the perfect wife for me in that sense. Besides that, my kids, she's the mother of my children. At the same time, there was stuff that was going on in the marriage that I was clueless. I really was. I didn't understand. I didn't know what it meant to be a present father. I didn't know what it meant to be a present husband. And I didn't understand any of it whatsoever. To me, it was like just having a good time, and you needed to have a good time. So that's what I did. I mean, there was at one point in my drinking career that she moved out for a month. She went to her sister's. And when she came back, she says, "I'm back." And I said, "Where were you?"
Oh no.
What?
Were you a functional drinker?
I was functional to the extent that I was functional until I wasn't. And I know that's an ambiguous answer. It's the same way that alcohol was fun until it wasn't. Towards the end of my addiction, by the time I had gone into business at a certain point. Don't ask me how I kept the business alive for 5 years. But we manipulate and we find ways to get people to do our work for us. And I would disappear for days on end. And everybody knew Arnie was a drunk except Arnie. Understanding what alcoholism is about, that it I have this abnormal reaction to alcohol that probably 85 or 80 to 85% of the population doesn't have, that creates this craving in me. I mean, you want to call it an allergy, you call it an abnormal reaction, coupled with this obsession of mine that I think, somewhere along the way, and it's an obsession, by the way, which is why it makes it a mental illness, the combination of those two, that I can safely enjoy and control my drinking. And unfortunately, for a guy like me, that doesn't happen. And it's not about being a bad person, and it's not about any of the 3 billion other reasons that people say, or they blame this one and that one. It's really that's what happens inside of this body. Why is my chemistry different than somebody else? You got me? I have no idea. It's a story of, it's like finding, there used to be a commercial on TV in New York in the middle of the night where this guy, I think it was a Seafield or Seawald Rehabilitation Center. And the guy would be sitting behind his desk, and he said, "Well, you come around the corner and there's a garbage truck sitting there, and there's a guy sitting in front of the garbage, laying on the ground in front of the garbage truck. He just got hit by the garbage truck." He said, "Do you sit there and figure out why the guy was hit, or do you get the guy to the hospital, take care of him, and then we'll figure it out later?" And that's really, what I had to work with. It didn't make a difference why I was the way that I was, who was doing what they were doing. I just had to take care of what I had to take care of. So yeah, in alcoholism and drug addiction, are they all the same? I'm not going to say they're all the same. But some of the basic tendencies and characteristics of them there is this phenomena of craving. There's an obsession of mind. There's a joy that comes from it. How many times that we've heard this? There's a nirvana that comes with the alcohol. We drink for the effect. We drug for the effect. The only problem is it's fun until it's not, and then it begins. What started out as fun, blocks a lot of different neurotransmitters. I don't want to get into the science of it because it really doesn't make a difference, but the neurotransmitters in our bodies, and then it lets go, and then the wave comes back, and then I have to, it's all kind of craziness. But yeah.
And did you looking back, were there the sort of telltale signs, like were you stashing bottles and
You
things
got
of
it.
that nature?
Oh yeah, hiding bottles in the closet, hiding in the toilet tank.
Wow. This may be a naive question, but I am curious, like, would you say it's always the case? Because I could think of instances without getting into my own personal life, not about me, but if one discovers that somebody is, has bottles in their drawers, does that by definition, would you say that means that they're an alcoholic or not necessarily?
You're getting,
are there certain things that say this person is definitely an alcoholic?
so you're getting into an area that's so gray, right? Because there are things that I can do today that are different only because the motivations are different. I'm not talking about substances themselves, behaviors that I would be doing when I was out there, and everybody, yeah, he's an alcoholic, so what do you expect? But you got to get it. I don't know how to answer the question. Not necessarily so. It really boils down to two criteria. Can a person stop entirely when he's willing, when he wants? And can he stay stopped? I stopped a million times, but I always started again. You get the guys, and I heard this like this. I went through this with my cigarettes. It took me 2 years from the time I stopped smoking. I started again and again and again and again. I didn't stop drinking that much. I only stopped drinking one time. I stopped drinking for 2 weeks. And then everybody was making fun of me because I wasn't drinking. So I got angry at that. So it was a good reason to drink. But the criteria, you don't need the 40 question test. It's really two things. Can he stop entirely when he wants? And does he not start again and stay stopped? And that's really a criteria. Now, just because somebody hides a bottle does not necessarily mean that the guy is an alcoholic. Abe Tversky used to say this all the time. We got to determine, what's the difference between somebody who's an alcoholic and somebody who's not an alcoholic. But it takes a little bit of time to see it. Does he have sufficient reason to stop and stay stopped? What else is going on in the family? Because, by the way, it's all inclusive. You can't separate the family from it. If a spouse is involved, generally speaking, my experience has been, and the literature in Alcoholics Anonymous talks about it, and I'm dealing with a couple of guys right now where their families are neurotic because of the people who are drinking. And you want to go look up neurotic in the dictionary, we're nuts. I mean, the people around us are nuts because of it.
Okay, so there's no way that, I guess there are a couple of ways to figure out if someone has the problem. I'm more concerned for our listeners that, maybe there's a guy that's not sure if he is or he's not honest with himself. But you have to be able to get to the step where you're ready to take action and go and figure out how to stop it.
Absolutely.
Because without that conviction, we had another guest that said, you have to give up before you can work on it.
What makes somebody want to give up, though?
That's my question. So what do you say to the guy who's not sure, but you're trying to get them to take action because everyone around them sees it, but he still is in denial, or, I can quit any day, or,
So show me that you can quit and stay stopped. It's really a difficult thing because there's a lot of, again, we're back in gray areas in the sense that, there's a lot of peer pressure. My buds are drinking, this one made a kiddish, this one made a kiddish, and he's got top shelf stuff. And I've heard this thousands of times already. The question really comes down to, can a guy take an honest assessment of what's going on in his family? Where's the spouse in all this? What's going on? How's the family life? And it's not because it's a judgment on the family life. Trust me, guys. We're human beings, and we screw up because we screw up. It's the name of the game. But is there honesty, and is there integrity? Is there credibility? Is there open discussion? Is there connection, true connection between the people that are involved, that they can sit down and have this discussion? Listen, I've been in relationships since I've been divorced, and I've been called out on stuff, and I've been able to say, you know what, you're right. I made a mistake. My bad. What can I do to help? When I was drinking, that's the last thing in the world that I wanted to say. The first thing I would say is, yo, it's my life. And if I want to have, and this is how I have a good time. So how do you have willingness? The question really comes down to, in my world, how do you have willingness when you don't have willingness? How do you want to do something when you don't want to do it? And it comes down to Do we have sufficient reason to stop? Do we have sufficient reason to stay stopped? How's it impacting the people that are around us? And how much denial is really in the picture? Because generally speaking, everybody wants to protect everybody else. We care about, you know, our father, our mother, our child, particularly in my case, my children and my grandchildren. And I watch it go on all the time with the people that I work with. One guy I'm dealing with right now, he's an alcoholic, and his mom is an active alcoholic. And the husband, the father and the husband, is sitting there going, yeah, but I love her and she's fine and it's her mother's fault, you know, all kind of stuff. In the meantime, what's really happening in the family? And denial, by the way, as we say, is not just a river in Egypt. Denial really is it's a mental block in having the willingness or the ability, forget the willingness, but having the ability to see what's really happening, because there's so many factors that are involved. It's so complex. So you got me.
Like, do you think someone has to hit rock bottom? Is there a way?
I don't know what rock bottom means. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
You know, no, I mean, from what I know from your story, you lost a lot at rock bottom, or whenever you decided, when you decided to take action,
right?
You lost a lot.
Yeah, I burnt my life to the ground. By the way, I burnt my life to the ground in recovery too, but that's different. There has to be a willingness to at least believe that a willingness is possible. That usually only comes when people have been, you know, pummeled into the ground, you know, over and over and over and over. Does that mean it has to be that way? No. You know, there's many tools out there today. There's plenty of help out there to bring the awareness level up, that people can, you know, start taking a look at what's going on. I have one guy that I work with. His wife said to him, he says, "Look, it's real simple. You know, I love you dearly. You know, we have 2 kids, and I want our lives to work. And I'm not going to sit here and clean up after you because you want to get drunk. Now, either you're in this thing or you're not in this thing." Well, there is subtle reality, you know, and she was dead serious about it. How many people can really say that? How many people will really stick to their guns with this stuff? A lot of people do not stick to their guns. Okay, so he's a little crazy, so he's a little off, so he gets drunk once in a while, so what? But it's really an honest assessment, having the ability to have that honest assessment of what's going on in the relationship to begin with, to make it happen. My ex number one, I don't know that she had the ability to do that. Okay, so life was bad. So to her, it was, like I said, to her, to some extent, there was a normalcy to it. So you got me.
If there was a normalcy to it, so then would you say, so it sounds like your divorce with your first wife, it wasn't, I'm trying to think of how to frame this question. It wasn't like, you know, you hear a lot of times, a lot of people say like, oh, you know, we got divorced because of his or her addiction problem. Like, it sounds like that wasn't a specific reason that she would have pinpointed, for example. It was kind of just everything, all the, like you were saying, it's all holistic, like all the circumstances together, correct?
Correct. That's how I would classify the demise of my first relationship. Then again, also, I was incapable. Truth is that I had no clue how to be in a relationship. I had no clue how to be vulnerable in a relationship. I had no clue how to take positive criticism to make change at that time. If you would have said to me, well, you're doing this, I would go, you know, a certain finger would pop off of one of my hands, you know, to tell you where I think you should go. I wasn't capable of doing it. So, and it was a combination really of both of us. And again, it's not a judgment. I'm not being judgmental and I'm not self-righteous about it. She, in many ways, as I said, was really the perfect woman for me at the time. She was.
How long were you married for?
Say it again.
How long were you married for? The first
Still trying to figure that out. We got married in I believe it was 1972 or 1973. We got divorced in 86. something like that. The numbers are just, they're ambiguous because I really don't know.
Right.
Okay. And then my second marriage, the marriage lasted 18, 19 years.
Oh, wow. And
Yeah.
that was already post sobriety, right?
I was in sobriety, but again, managing my life and all the areas that go with the characteristics that surround an alcoholic had to be dealt with, and I never knew how to deal with that at the time. So, you take me from being incapable of being in a relationship to putting me in a relationship that I was incapable of being in. And neither one of us, we have alcoholics in general, we have a phenomenal ability of choosing the right individual that isn't right for us.
Hmm.
It's just what we do. It's just what
What,
we do.
what does that look like? I'm curious because you went through a first marriage and you weren't capable of, you didn't know what it meant to be in a relationship. And I think a lot of us could certainly relate. I mean, I think it's actually incredible when you think about people getting married so young. It's incredible that any marriages kind of survive, because when you think about it, like, what do we know at the age of, I got married at 21, or was it 22, whatever the case is, had a child at 23. Don't know anything at that point in our lives. So you come into a second marriage armed with that experience and wisdom that you gained, following your first marriage. So what would you say are the challenges in that second relationship, for example?
I think the challenges are the same that were the challenges in the first marriage that I never really dealt with. Honesty, integrity, vulnerability, communication, connection, making not making the other person more important. I'm not saying put them on a pedestal. I don't want to go there. That's not where I'm headed for. But making that person your partner, and not your, not somebody that you're using for various different reasons. If there's a selfishness, look, we all have selfishness in us. If I wouldn't be selfish, I wouldn't get up out of bed in the morning, to take care of myself. We know that. If I wasn't jealous, I wouldn't work. Trust me, I wouldn't at all. At the same time, if I don't have that person as a number one priority in my life, because they're my partner, then I'm already doomed. It's already doomed. Now, does that mean that I didn't start my second marriage with that in mind? Maybe I did. Okay, but then little things creep in, resentment creeps in, anger creeps in, fear creeps in. And if I'm not dealing with it on a healthy level, then I'm only going to go back to where I was, where I was years before. Because if I don't know any better, then I'm always doing the same thing that I did. And if I always did what I've done, I'm always going to get what I got. So how do I learn how to make those changes? But you also have to remember that my partner has to also be willing to do this work. We have a tendency, or guys like me have a tendency, to find that person who's just as injured. And knowing very quickly, when I sit with a new client, I know almost very quickly what I can, whether it's in business or whether it's, recovery, what I can, quote, get away with. Now, am I going to utilize that as a manipulative tool, or am I going to utilize it as a growth potential? That's something that's going to have to be up to me, that I have to be consciously mindful of, to be able to make that work. And I mean, I was blessed that, about 8-9 years ago, I had met somebody, and we really hit it off well in every area of our lives. The fact that it didn't work out was for different reasons, but it was remarkable. The ability to get close to somebody and feel safe with somebody manifested itself. I didn't have that with either one of my spouses. Now, was that my fault? Probably some of it is I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know how to do it. But I have to say that I'll take 51% of the responsibility. I'll even go to say I'll take 75%. But they got a piece of it. They have a piece of it, and because they're just as I'm going to use the term guilty, but it's not the word that I really want. They're unknowledgeable of how to do and how to deal with a guy like me to begin with, because I don't necessarily know how to deal with a guy like me.
Wow. So did you, when you, is part of the 12 steps also therapy, or that's not part of it? Did you do that?
Not necessarily so. There's a tremendous amount of work of self-reflection. There's a difference between self-help and self-reflection. My mentor, Rabbi Ep19, talks about it a lot. And my friends with long-term sobriety talk about it. If it was just self-help, we would all get self-help and we'd be done. But obviously self-help does not necessarily work. It's really about a lot of 12-step work is a lot of reflection and being able to humble myself to the point of understanding that I don't have all the answers, that I can be wrong, and in many cases I probably am wrong, and it's not because I'm beating myself up, because I'm learning how to accept the fact that I'm a fallible human being. So today, people ask me, my kids, we joke about it. I said, Abba, your father is being a knucklehead today because he screwed up about something, and they'll go, yeah, we know, Abba. Abba's a knucklehead, or I'm crazy today, and there are days that I am. Therapy has worked for me, and sharing my own experience in situations where my recovery program and taking a look at myself, I was incapable of communicating that with my significant other, which is great when you have a mediator, a therapist, a marriage counselor, that can be able to interpret my words into her words. And so, yeah. So is it necessary to have 12-step program to get clean and sober? No. Is it necessary to be in therapy to get clean and sober? No. But whatever works, and we're at least in my world, I'm a very big proponent that whatever works that brings people together in a positive light, that's what needs to be done.
And part of recovery, from what I understand, is not dating anyone for that first year. Is that a thing?
It's the same way as when Jews have sex. Do they use a hole in the sheet? I don't know. The general consensus is, and again, this is my experience of living a program. The idea is that, as I said, the good news is we get our feelings back. The bad news is we get our feelings back. I put down drugs and alcohol, and all those neurotransmitters wake up, and my brain cells wake up, and some of the stuff cleans out, some of it takes longer. But I'm a pretty sensitive guy. Now, I'm sensitive without the drugs and the alcohol. I'm even more sensitive without the alcohol. And when people say stuff to me, especially when I'm in a relationship with somebody who I have this expectation of loving me the way that I want to be loved, and I can't be loved that way. So it kind of triggers a whole bunch of stuff, and, oh my God, and I'm no good. And it brings people back to a negative self-reflection. So the suggestion, which of course I did not listen to, the suggestion is that for the first year, give yourself a break, get in touch with your emotions, learn how to start beginning to deal with some of these emotions. And then we'll see, how, we can take you forward from there. Being able to be in a relationship with dignity and grace and self-respect is a lot different than being in a relationship for partnership and sex. There are two different things. So.
Yeah, we just got a request from somebody to talk about dating advice after post-divorce. So I see sort of a parallel when, after divorce, it's also a major trauma, and there's a recovery period. It's not the same as an addiction where you need to kind of figure out what's going on below and figuring out how to get day to day. But there's still a trauma, and you still need to recover. And I like to use the word recalibrate. So I'm that's why I'm asking that question, because I want to know if you did it again, would you have taken a year to kind of learn yourself better?
So I'm out of a relationship now for about 5 years. It was a very, very deep, intense relationship. part of me is that broken guy that figures it's never going to happen again, right? It ain't happening, guys. Okay, God's got a plan, and I got to just live with God's plan. However, I did start dating recently. And the good news that's come from it is that I have a healthier boundary and a healthier value that I never had before. I guess I don't have to tell this to everybody. You and I both know that when you leave Jewish law out of the picture in a relationship, or complete Jewish law, bodies, physical bodies can get in the way, and understandably so. I mean, I get it. I mean, there's a lot of connection when it comes to this stuff, and it also affects the relationship, and it also affects the value of the relationship. And I'm not preaching in the sense that I'm telling people what to do or not to do. This is what I've learned, and being able to step back and look at the person as a person, not for what they can give me sexually, has made a huge difference in my ability to get close to somebody in a different way, it's a totally different experience. So you're getting into an area that it's up everybody on their own. They should do what works for them. Sometimes God, kind of pushes me in the right direction. While I have gotten used to living alone, not having noise in the house or whatever I do, it would be nice to be able to travel with somebody. It would be nice to share a bed with somebody. It would be nice to, walk down the street holding hands with somebody. And maybe it's time that I forgive a little bit, that the mistakes that I've made in the past were based on different motivations than what I have today. That there's a healthier, again, like I said, a healthier boundary, a healthier, value that I have that makes a difference. One of my grandkids got married about a year and a half ago, and they were both totally naive. I mean, when I tell you naive, they were totally naive. Had no clue of outside, interest, had no clue of sexuality, anything more than, you get married, you have sex, and you have kids, kind of thing. And I watch, because I watch, I'm Zadie, I'm grandpa. I gotta, how are my grandkids, how are my kids doing? And my daughter and I, we've spoken about this more than once, that maybe it's okay when there's healthy boundaries, that they don't know everything beforehand, that they grow together with this stuff. I mean, like I said, my sex life was taught out of a magazine. My sex life was taught from television and from movies. And my sex life was taught of what not to do based on Jewish law, which they don't all meld together. They might meld together if the boundaries were healthier, but they weren't. I didn't have that initially. So yeah, this is stuff that takes time. It's stuff, but everybody needs to do what works for them for the right reasons, not because I'm avoiding a relationship because I don't want to be hurt again, but I'm trying to make something happen on a healthier level.
And how is your relationship with your kids? I remember it that they always spoke about you fondly, but again, I came in a little later than all this went down. But I'm just amazed that you've kept such a close relationship, at least now, in the last 20-something years that I've known you and your family. How did you do that?
So we're gonna go back into tears over here. I'll tell you a story that happened at the end of my recovery. And I was totally wasted. I lived in an apartment that was a third-floor apartment. And it was a huge apartment, but it was a third-floor apartment. I had 5, I think, kids at the time. And I came up the steps and I was totally wasted. And as any other multitasking individual, when I was wasted, I could do many things multitasking. Like I had a cup of coffee in one hand, a drink in the other hand, a cigarette in one hand, a joint in the other, and shopping bags too, all at the same time. And I came up the steps and I kicked on the door because my hands were right. And I heard them in the background saying, Abba's home, daddy's home, daddy's home. And they opened the door, they ran down the hallway and they opened the door and they saw me. And I got a look. It was a look of pitiful scorn, like, oh my God.
Mm.
The AA literature calls it incomprehensible demoralization. It was this
Hmm.
look of like, oh my God, and in my mind, you can call it anything you want. It's like, you piece of and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
So one of the things, so that was one story that happened. The second story that happened that really woke me up is after I got sober and I had split up with ex number one. One of my kids was sleeping over, two of my kids were sleeping over. And before she went to sleep that night, I said to her, I said, I love you. And she looked at me funny. And I said, well, what's the matter? She said, what do you mean you love me? Hey, what do you mean? What is that? What does that mean? She said, you don't love me. And it really hit me. Now, don't ask me why it hit me or whatever, but it was then that I was able to realize that my relationships with my kids were really crazed. They were really off base. And I made a decision right then and there that I was going to be the guy that keeps the lines of communications open with my kids no matter what it takes. And I have. By the grace, really, by the grace of God, whatever it has taken for me to keep those lines open and to make myself vulnerable to them. And I grew up in a household where my father said that, you will respect me because of your father. And today I say, I will respect you, and I'm not requiring anything in return. And my relationship today, I would not give up my relationship with my children, any one of my children, for what it is. Each one of them in their own way. Maybe some stronger in some ways and weaker in the others, and others stronger in some ways. I'm welcome into their homes with open arms. I am dealt with very respectfully. I am trusted in their homes. I am trusted with my grandchildren. So when you ask, where it's holding and how it's holding, it's only by the grace of God. I can't tell you how it got the way that it was any more than, I'm there, I'm present for them, I show up for them, I do whatever I can for them. I have healthy boundaries with them and values with them that I was incapable of having. And don't ask me when it changed. I don't know when it changed, but at a certain point it changed. So I'm very grateful. I am very grateful. And the only request that I have for my kids when I'm gone, I finally pulled that line on that. You'll see when I'm gone, when I'm dead and gone. Is it because I have all girls? Is it please just arrange that somebody says cottage for me? I have no expectations. I love my kids. I feel strongly that they love me. They threw me a birthday party when I turned 70. That was absolutely amazing.
Mm.
They're just constantly present and loving. I mean, and I can't expect anything more considering where I came from.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
absolutely. And on that note, we do have something that we call the too dad to quit moment.
The
Where
what?
we want the too dad to quit moment.
Okay.
A moment that you can share with us where you were just so proud to be a dad, and you just felt like, wow, I am the dad, man. This is awesome. And if you could share one of those moments with us, we really appreciate it.
You're gonna bring me to tears. I don't know that I was ever in that point. I think that it's I don't like using the term "I am the dad" because there's a lot of ego and arrogance involved in that.
Mm.
I
That's
am.
interesting.
Say that again.
So that's interesting, but if it wasn't 1 a.m, I would go down that route. But
We can always
maybe for
revisit
round
it.
two.
We can always revisit this anytime,
Yeah,
guys.
yeah.
I'm yours. I'm
Round
ready.
two. Anyway, carry on. Sorry, I interrupted you.
I guess it happened recently, and I'm trying to remember exactly the story because I don't have linear memory too well anymore. But just Abba, what can we do for you? Abba, what's going on? Abba, this. I had surgery. I had hernia surgery back at the end of December, and someone was there to pick me up. Someone they cooked for me. It's just this overall sense of feeling that my kids love me and my kids care. And my need is to hold on to that because I don't hold on to believing that somebody loves me just for who I am. That's my struggle. That's something that I go through on a day-to-day basis.
Hmm.
It's difficult. It really is. But again, by being the respectful person that I am and being present for them and allowing them to be who they are, the way they are, allows me to feel, I don't look, I can receive what they give. I'm not looking to take anything from them. And in that, I've gotten blessings upon blessings upon blessings.
Wow.
Beautiful.
I actually, Ben, I have to ask you because it is an interesting comment to me. So can you elaborate a bit on what you meant by that when you said before about the part about the ego was saying, I am the dad? I am curious about that. If I can ask you.
I think part of, not that I know that part of alcoholism is an ego-driven, you have to love me kind of thing. There's a lot of arrogance behind it. Call it narcissism. There's so many different terms with it.
Right.
Whenever I get into this state in my mind, and again, it's a mindset that I am the best, I am the greatest, I am, okay, I have arrived. That's usually the beginning of my downfall. And it's necessary for me as a recovering alcoholic to have that humility and to understand that God runs the world. I'm just a person here. I'm a bozo on the bus like everybody else. I'm just like everybody else who's out there. I get up in the morning and I struggle the same way everybody else struggles. Sometimes I get blessed a little bit more than others. And yeah, it's really great that I come back from a meeting or I just spoke at a meeting in some famous place, and because I'm semi-famous in the recovery world, and there you go. There I am. And the parking place right in front of my apartment is open, and I'm going, yes, God, but it's really about keeping myself right-sized. And that's something that I have to work on. And when I do that, then I get to see other people as they are, because if I feel greater than others, then I look down at people, and I'm not. You are just the same as I am. I'm the same as you are. And you guys know this very quickly. As soon as you run into somebody who thinks they're better than you, you get that signal real quick.
Oh yeah. But you have to, it sounds like from what you're saying, but that it's a balance as well with loving yourself. Like you were saying about, not to put words in your mouth, but I think you were saying the idea of like feeling that you're worthy of people loving you for who you are. So humility has to be balanced with you also recognizing your importance and self-worth, wouldn't you say? It's kind
Correct. There's no question. And this is stuff that for years, it's taken me years to understand even any of this, where Abe Tversky talks about this constantly. You can read about his stuff, is understanding that my self-esteem is very involved in all this stuff. He claims, and I don't fully understand it, that low self-esteem is the root of all addiction. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a therapist. I mean, I don't know that it's necessarily accurate, but I'm not arguing. I'm not disputing it. I honor it. At the same time, being able to raise my own perception of self is something that a guy like me has a constant struggle with. That's all. I could do the greatest things in the world, guys, and I do. I've been literally all over the world. I've been in Israel. I've spoken at Hebrew University. I've been all over the United States. I have been, asked to do. And yes, I feel great and I feel wonderful. And then you have the one guy, Abe tells the story. He gave this thing to a lecture to 120 therapists, and 119 evaluations came back great, and one came back negative. He says, which one do you think that he focused on for 2 weeks? That's Arnie. That's Arnie. And why? Who knows why? I have this propulsion system of fear. I have this propulsion system of less than, and that's the stuff that I have to work on. That's why a guy like me does a gratitude list every day. That's why a guy like me reaches out to others. That's why a guy like me does service to others. And I don't want anything in return. I don't want anything in return. You want to pay me for doing work, that's one thing. But when it comes to uplifting people, no, let God take care of it. And the more that I do this work, all those things that I chased, all those 7 areas of life that I mentioned before, God seems to be taking care of. That I don't have to rob, and I don't have to lie, and I don't have to steal, and I don't have to be dishonest. And it's just a different life. It's a totally different life.
I
Beautiful.
think it's like a case of imposter syndrome.
Got me. I'm not quite sure I know what that means.
From my understanding, it's where, you know, good things are happening and people think things of you, but like you're waiting for the ball to drop when people really realize who you are.
I don't think I have that anymore. I think in early recovery, probably very much so. I think that my struggle of dealing with my alcoholism is something that kind of never goes away. At the same time, if something's going on, I focus, I keep focusing on God instead of in infinite God instead of finite self. Finite self limits me. It reproduces fear over and over and over again. I've watched myself. I don't know why I have this fear, particularly around money. I mean, I can tell you that now. I don't know where it's come from. I've worked through it, I thought, in therapy, and my job is still to put in the effort to go make a living. Now, does that mean the rock? I mean, I can tell you as one of my sponsors keeps telling me, he said, Arnie, when have you never not had? And I have to be able to see that and focus in on that. So,
Well, I do want to say, you know, I lived in your sister's house for a while, and I spent a whole lot of time there, and she only had good things to say about you.
yeah,
You know,
here we
as
go.
much as you guys, you know, joke back and forth, she was like your biggest fan, and
I know she
and-
was.
and
At the
I think
towards the end
we both miss her dearly.
yeah, towards the end of her life, we had the last few months of her life. We had unbelievable conversations about this stuff, and she told me, I mean, she inspired me my whole life. I told her that she was my biggest inspiration, and I get it, and I understand it. And stories we can go into again. It'll take days, and I got to go because I got to go.
Yeah.
But stories that she would tell me, that things that I suggested to her through my own experience in AA, she was able to carry on not only to her family but to others, and the rewards that came back to her because of it. And it's just mind-boggling how a little shift in perception can change a person's life. So
Absolutely. And so the last thing we'd like to leave our guests, our listeners with, is words of wisdom from our guests about if they're about to go through divorce or thinking about divorce. I know, you know, you've taken up biking recently. Just what got you through it, and what should they be thinking, and what kind of advice, if someone would come to you today and say, hey, I don't know what to do, I'm stuck, and you've been there already, what would you say to them?
So here we go. That's another 2-hour conversation. Simply put, really, you know, looking at the end of the tunnel is that when you're in the tunnel, you know, there's light at the end of the tunnel, but it's awfully dark inside the tunnel. There's a grieving process. There's a healing process. There's a pain process that we need to go through, or I've needed to go through. I mean, everybody does this differently. And by the way, there's no right or wrong way of doing this. You know, I don't care who it is. There's no formula, but we all have to go through it. And saying, don't give up. Just don't give up. And it's not because you were right or you were wrong or you were bad or you were good. Maybe you needed to go through this to grow through this. You know, it's a phenomenal, you know, picture that we can't draw pictures so easily, and to understand that everything that I have gone through in my life and I continue to go through is to help somebody else. End of story. And it only benefits us, and if we're doing it back to that honesty, with honesty and open-mindedness and willingness, and there's a sense of value that comes that we didn't have before, for whatever the reasons are. Our parents didn't show us. Maybe they didn't know how to do it. Their parents didn't. You look at my family's history. They were dysfunctional back from the times they came from Russia in the 1800s. Like, it was crazy stuff. And yet, at the same time, you know what? We all needed to be where we are. And who am I to tell God what God's journey is for myself or for anybody else? Who am I to say that where God has taken me, it stops here? That there's always more. There's always more. There's always more. There's always hope. And it's my job to stay tuned to that hope.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for giving us your time. And before we go, I just want to let our listeners know, you can find us on toodadtoquit.com, toodadtoquit on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. And we are really interested in sharing your stories and having you on here. And please let us know in the comments if there's topics that you'd like us to cover. Send us your questions. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for listening to the Too Dad to Quit podcast. Available at toodadtoquit.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.